If Alberta votes to separate from Canada, can Indigenous communities legally block it? That's what the Alberta NDP and several treaty chiefs are now claiming, that Alberta couldn't even hold a separation vote because it would violate treaty rights. But legal experts, including constitutional lawyers and former Supreme Court precedent, say that's not how this works. In fact, they say the First Nations don't have a veto. The First Nations have no more say than you or I, or anyone else in this province or country for that matter, as separating would come down to a democratic process with a majority say. I'm Isaac Lamoureux, and today I'm going to walk you through the facts, the law, and the political spin, so you can decide for yourself. We'll also take a look at who is pushing this sovereignty movement forward and what Danielle Smith is really saying. Let's get into it. Despite vocal opposition from treaty chiefs and the Alberta NDP, legal experts say that First Nations cannot legally block a citizen-led referendum on Alberta independence. Canadian Constitution Foundation lawyer Josh DeHaas said, quote, "There is nothing I'm aware of that would suggest that First Nations people could prevent those discussions from taking place. Even where treaties exist within Canada, the law is clear. That is, it is the Crown that is sovereign and holds underlying title to all of the land." DeHaas cited the 1998 Supreme Court reference on Quebec's secession, which ruled that if a province held a referendum on a clear question and there was a clear majority, it would trigger a constitutional obligation for Ottawa and the provinces to negotiate the terms of separation. Constitutional lawyer and specialist Keith Wilson backed that up. On X, he wrote, quote, "Respectfully, the Chiefs would benefit from legal advice. They don't have a veto on whether Alberta separates." Wilson's comments follow some chiefs and Indigenous leaders throwing Bill 54 in the air. Respectfully, these chiefs and the Alberta NDP might reconsider their stance against democracy if they took a second to really think about what they're advocating for here, which is of course an authoritarian approach against a clearly democratic and majority consensus approach. Wilson says First Nations would have several options after a successful referendum vote. They could remain a part of Canada, they could join a newly sovereign Alberta, or they could negotiate a new agreement altogether. But none of those scenarios block the referendum from happening in the first place. And that's what this debate is really about. Whether 177,000 Albertans have the right to sign a petition and ask a democratic question. Constitutionally, they do, or more accurately, they will. Contrary to what Naheed Nenshi and Doug Ford are claiming, Danielle Smith is not calling for separation, at least not directly. Instead, she said that if Alberta collects the required signatures, a referendum will happen in 2026, because the government must honor the new citizen-initiated referendum law under Bill 54. And Smith said she would do nothing to violate treaty rights or Indigenous rights. She said, quote, "You can't vote away treaty rights. You can't vote away Indigenous rights. You can't have a referendum on things that are enshrined in our various constitutional conventions and laws and court decisions." She added, quote, "Any citizen-initiated referendum question must not violate the constitutional rights of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples and must uphold and honor Treaties 6, 7, and 8, should any referendum question ever pass. This is non-negotiable." While Smith has made it clear time and time again that her government would not put forward an independence vote, she said she would respect a citizen-led initiative if it met the 177,000 signature threshold under the new legislation. The new 177,000 signature requirement comes after Smith lowered the legal threshold to trigger citizen-initiated referenda. Previously, the requirement was based on 20% of all registered electors across Alberta, which is where the prior 600,000 number was drawn from. Now, the new threshold is based on 10% of those who voted in the last election, which is where the 177,000 requirement comes from. Smith also launched the Alberta Next panel and a negotiating team for what she's calling the Alberta Accord, a plan to demand port access, repeal of federal energy laws, and more equitable federal transfers. She says the goal is not separation, but strengthening Alberta's place in Canada. She has reiterated time and again that she prefers a sovereign Alberta within Canada, but if citizens have really had enough, then separation might just be on the table. Still, she has made it clear that if Ottawa refuses to listen, she will not block Albertans from taking the next step. Hey guys, if you've watched this far, please like the video and consider subscribing. I dream of one day doing this full time, and your support would go a long way in accomplishing this goal. Thank you very much. Ontario Premier Doug Ford slammed Alberta's separatist movement, saying, quote, "This is a time to unite the country, not people saying, oh, I'm leaving the country." Smith fired right back at Ford, though. She said, quote, "I don't tell him how he should run his province, and I would hope that he doesn't tell me how I should run mine." Alberta NDP leader Naheed Nenshi launched a campaign at separatistsmith.ca, accusing Smith of having a radical separatist agenda. While he tried to dissuade Albertans from signing any petition or initiating any democratic process that would trigger a separatist referendum, he, of course, is now calling on Albertans to sign his own petition. I mean, it's ridiculous. BC Premier David Eby also told Smith and Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe to, quote, push back strongly against separatist movements. Like Smith, Moe said he would not stand in the way of a citizen-initiated referendum process urging for separation. Meanwhile, Quebec's Parti Québécois, a separatist party, not to be confused with the Bloc Québécois, by the way, this is a provincial party, praised Smith for defending Alberta's autonomy. The leader of the party, Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, said, quote, "This is a premier who has decided to address the government of Canada directly. I will respond to your abuse of power with concrete actions." So if Danielle Smith isn't leading the separatist movement, then who is? I wrote an exclusive on the key players on Juno News for True North. So here are the main players. Of course, first there's the Alberta Prosperity Project, which now has over 240,000 pre-registered supporters as of this week. The Alberta Prosperity Project is one of the most prominent nonpartisan voices in the sovereignty movement. It's an educational organization advocating for Alberta to hold a referendum that would give the provincial government a mandate to negotiate its place within or outside of Confederation. The group also advocates for the creation of an Alberta pension plan, an Alberta police force, and provincial control over resource development, taxation, immigration, and employment insurance. While not a political party, it aims to surpass the 177,000 signature threshold, which of course it has, but it's still using the old 600,000 threshold because it technically hasn't passed through Parliament yet, to trigger a referendum. Its activities include hosting educational events across the province and online. Once enough signatures are acquired, they're saying, of course, above 600,000, the organization plans to submit its petition to Elections Alberta for approval and begin the formal 120-day signature collection process. This process, by the way, was 90 days prior to the legislative change, which hasn't technically passed Parliament yet. Another grassroots separation petition has been circulating on change.org for several years and has recently found renewed attention with this push for separation. With over 226,000 signatures, the petition calls for Alberta and other Western provinces like BC, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba to enter survival mode and begin polling public support for separation from the rest of Canada. The petition was launched by Ashley Braz, and although it holds no legal weight and isn't recognized under Alberta's referendum laws, it does continue to generate significant online attention and speaks to broader sentiments of Western alienation. The Republican Party of Alberta is a registered political party that has made joining the United States its central platform. The party announced a new leader recently on April 29th, which was, of course, Cameron Davies, who moved to Canada from the US as a child, and he was raised in Spruce Grove, Alberta. Perhaps most interestingly, Keith Wilson recently denounced the party. He said it gives the Alberta NDP more power and could even help them form government. Take a quick listen to what he had to say.
To your point about political parties, let's be clear. Alberta's history is very clearly set out. The patterns of our political, of what you have to do to form a government, and what you have to do or what can happen for you to cause you to lose power and not be able to form a government. It's math. It's electoral math. And this group that's now arrived on the scene, and particularly with some force this week, what they call themselves is the Republican Party. The only two things that are going to come from that, and I realize these people are well intended, but we have to be realistic. The only two things that will come from that party is dividing the vote on the right, clearing the way for the NDP to become the next provincial government in 2027, which we don't want. No reasonable person should want that, in my view. And it will also weaken and reduce the chances of a successful referendum vote. You don't achieve this type of change ever through political parties. You do it through grassroots organizations.
There's also the Wild Rose Independence Party and the Independence Party of Alberta, both pushing for full separation, including a new constitution and even military. The Wild Rose Independence Party is a provincial political party formed through the merger of Wexit Alberta and the Freedom Conservative Party in 2020. It advocates for the creation of a sovereign, democratic Alberta rooted in personal freedoms and the rule of law. The Independence Party of Alberta supports full separation from Canada and the creation of a new provincial constitution and federal-style institutions. It envisions forming a Ministry of Independence preparation to build out Alberta's justice system, military, and governance frameworks as an independent state. Once focused on reshaping the United Conservative Party from within, Take Back Alberta has now formally embraced the cause of Alberta independence. The group argues that Alberta must exit a, quote, nation in terminal decline, and supports reforms such as lower taxes, a provincial pension plan, and full sovereignty. On April 16, 2025, the founder of Take Back Alberta, David Parker, published a piece titled "Alberta Separatism Must Succeed," laying out the group's evolving position. He wrote, quote, "Alberta deserves a future. If Canada refuses to provide one, we must build it ourselves. In the coming weeks, I'll make the full case for Alberta separation. The highlights: more money for Alberta pensioners, lower taxes for all Albertans, including corporate and income tax, and most importantly, a future outside of a nation in terminal decline." Parker went on to warn that Prime Minister Mark Carney is the greatest threat Alberta has ever faced. There's also various X accounts at the forefront of the Alberta separation movement. For example, Alberta Secession Y, Alberta Separation, and Rise of Alberta, all of whom are organizing legal info and countering claims of Indigenous veto power. From registered parties to grassroots momentum, Alberta's sovereignty movement isn't fringe anymore. It's mainstream and organized. So no, First Nations cannot veto a separation vote. That's not how the Constitution works. That's not what the courts have said, and that's not what legal experts are arguing. What's really at play is whether Alberta voters, Indigenous or not, should have the right to debate their future democratically through a legal and peaceful vote. And based on what we've seen, that movement isn't slowing down. Thanks for watching. My name's Isaac Lamoureux. If you learned something new, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next deep dive. I'll keep showing you things the legacy media would never dream of. I'll see you next time. Thank you and God bless.